Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and Gamefound over the next week. If you're new here, we do this every single week, so if you do want to stay up to date, this is definitely a place to be. And I normally do like to start these episodes by going over some big news and announcements that I just found out about, but I don't really have anything for you this week. But I do like to give a quick mention to Alex over at Boardgame Co. because him and I do work together keeping track of all these campaigns. I do this every single week, but he posts a video at the start of each month going over the heavy hitters for that month. So if you do want to get a bit of a peek into the future, as well as a bunch of other really great content, you'll definitely want to check out his channel, and I will have a link to his channel in the description down below. I do also like to give a quick mention to Mike over at Zilla Blitz, because although Alex and I do cover most board games, Zilla Blitz does focus exclusively on the historical war games. This is also a genre that Alex and I just don't cover in near as much detail, and there's other crowdfunding platforms and outlets for these that we just don't cover, whereas Mike definitely will. So if you are interested in this genre, I will have a link to his channel in the description as well, and that is a great segue into this episode because the first game we have is launching on April 21st, and it is also a historical war game, and this one's called Dominus Rex. Like I said, I won't be covering this one in as much detail as the other games, but this is a war game that does take place during medieval Europe. And in this game, players are going to be rolling for initiative each round, and then you're going to be collecting taxes from the different regions that you currently have control of. Players are then going to be using their units to progress into new territories, fight opposing troops, and defend their land. And then you're going to be using that income that you have established in order to bolster up the areas that you do own and potentially purchase more units. And it looks like there are some unique aspects to this game, especially when it comes to the battles, because depending on the size and type of battle that you are engaging in, it might just be resolved through dice rolling depending on the units that you have there, or you might be placing units out onto this combat board, where each of the different types of units that you have engaged in the battle can all interact in their own unique ways. And that's my limit for this game on this channel, but if you do want to learn more about this game, I will have it linked in the description down below, and you can go ahead and check it out for yourself. And like I said, definitely check out Zilla Blitz's channel if this is a genre that you're interested in. I'm sure he will have more information on this one, and you can also find that linked in the description below as well. This next campaign is launching on April 22nd, and it's actually featuring two different small box games, and these are both abstract strategy games. The two that we have are called Gazebo and Gingham, and they do play quite a bit different from each other, but I'll just go through them one by one, letting you know how they play, starting with Gazebo. And this is a game that was designed by Rainer Knizia, and it does feature that simplicity that you do see in a lot of his games, while also sporting a lot of depth when it comes to your decision making. And this is a game that's really easy to set up and play because all you got to do is roll out the shared mat that players are going to be playing on, and then each player is going to be starting with an identical set of tiles. These are all going to be face down, and you're just going to be maintaining a hand of 3 tiles at any given time, but players are just going to be taking turns placing one tile out onto the shared mat in any of the valid placement locations. These locations are either adjacent to one of the starting squares that are indicated on that mat, or adjacent to a tile that was already placed. Each player is also going to have a bunch of gazebo tokens that are matching their player color, and the goal of this game is pretty simple. It's just to be the first to get rid of all your gazebos. If you're able to do that, you win the game. Each time that you place a tile, there's 2 ways that you can put these gazebos out into play, assuming that you meet either of those requirements. The first one is pretty simple. Anytime that you create a group of at least 2 matching icons, that does allow you to place a gazebo out on that group. And you can see here that the orange player was able to place a tile that created a group of 2 green icons, and therefore they were able to put their gazebo there. But the second way they can place gazebos out onto the mat has to do with the way that this pink one is placed out, because there are these blue icons printed across the mat, and whichever player controls the most spaces around that location will also be able to put their gazebo there. If we go back to this image here, you can see that the blue player controls 2 spaces around it, but then the pink player actually controls 3 because they're controlling all 5 of these blue spaces, with 3 of them being beside that location. The other thing to note about this is that tiles can be placed together to create these bigger groups of icons, for example with these blue ones here. And anytime that you control a space that has 5 or more icons, that actually allows you to double up your gazebo, and that's why the pink player also has a stack of 2 here. And yes, this means that you can also steal locations from other players in a couple of ways, with the first one having to do with these printed spaces. So for example, if this blue player was able to get even more control of the spaces around that printed space, then they would be kicking that pink token out and then putting one of their own, because like I said, the person who gets to put their gazebo there is the one that controls the most spaces around it. But the second way that you can steal locations from other players is by connecting the groups that you control with a group that your opponent controls, assuming they are the same color. So for example, we have this yellow player controlling these two blue spaces, and then we have the blue player controlling these other two blue spaces. Let's say it was the yellow player's turn and they had a tile that featured two blue icons on it. They could actually place it here at the bottom in order to connect those two groups of blue together. Because they placed that tile, making their space bigger, they would actually take control of that whole region, kicking the blue player's token out, and then also that would be more than 5 spaces, which means that they could double up their token, getting rid of 2 of their gazebos in that single space. And that's pretty much how you play this game, and if you are interested in it, you can check out the campaign in the description below. But that is not the only game in this campaign, so let's go ahead and check out Gingham. And I really do like the theme with this one, because in this game, players are going to be controlling ants, trying to collect the most sweets in order to win the game. The main board features a grid pattern, and you're going to have a bunch of different sweet tokens randomly assigned into the different intersection points. Some of these tokens will have matching icons, and players are going to be trying to place their ant tokens out in such a way that they're connecting those same icons together, because if you're able to do that, then you can actually consolidate those tokens into a single stack, and if you fully encapsulate that stack, then you can also lock it down and claim it as your own. And this is a game that plays over a series of rounds, but the player who goes first each round has a very important role. In order to place your ant tokens out on the board, players first have to claim a column by using their queen ant tokens. The player who goes first gets to decide on which side of the board players will be placing those. So for example, in this image here, the first player decided to put their queen token onto this bottom side of the board, which means that all the other players also have to follow suit. Each player will have 2 of these queen tokens, and you're just going to be taking turns placing one of your tokens till all the other players have had a turn, and then you're going to be placing your second token. Whichever column you claim with your queen token, you'll also be able to put an ant in that column, with the only limitation being that you're not allowed to cross this stitched line across the diagonal here. This is a really important detail because it means some of these columns have a lot more or a lot less options when it comes to placing your worker ant. And you can see that in this image here, because if you chose one of the leftmost columns, you have a lot more spaces to choose from, whereas if you chose one of the rightmost columns, you might just have 1 or 2. But it's also important to note that the player who put their queen token closest to the star in the corner here also gets to be the first player for the following round. So even though you might be limiting your placement options by choosing one of those smaller columns, you are at least securing the right to go first on the next round, and also securing the right to choose which side of the board players will be playing on. In addition to the different sweets that players are trying to collect in order to earn victory points, there's also these sugar cubes that are going to be making their appearance as well, and players can collect those a little bit easier. And those are nice to have because you can actually spend different amounts of them in order to take some bonus actions and use some special abilities throughout the game. Players can also choose to put one of their ants into a location that already has an opponent ant there, and whenever you do that, you're going to be kicking that ant out and taking its place. But this does also allow that other player to place that ant anywhere they want on the board. But the game just continues like this, with players taking turns claiming different columns, putting their worker ants out onto the board, and trying to create the connections between the different tokens in order to then consolidate those tokens into different stacks that they're then trying to circle in order to lock down as victory points. It sounds like a lot when I say it in one breath there, but I guarantee this is a game that's not too difficult to teach and play. And if either of these games look interesting to you, you can check them out, and I will have a link to the campaign in the description down below. And this next campaign is also launching on the 22nd, and this one is called Starclash. And this one's a competitive sci-fi strategy game where players are going to be placing out different tokens, claiming different regions of the map, and fighting against their opponents. This was also a campaign that I thought was launching a couple weeks ago, but it got pushed back until now, so I do already have coverage for this one. So if you are interested in this, you can go ahead and check out more in the description down below, but I'll go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And this one's a competitive asymmetrical base building strategy strategy board game where players are going to be competing as factions, each with their own unique units and special abilities. Some units are going to be more suited for combat, while other units are more suited as workers, as you're going to be using them to collect different resources and build structures and bolster your other units. There's two ways to win this game. You can either be the first to gain 10 victory points or have the last base standing. This is a game that does play over a series of rounds, and at the start of each round, players are first going to gather resources from all of their worker units. There are two types of workers. There's the ones that harvest biosteel, which can be used for buildings and producing more units, but then there's workers that collect energy, which is going to be used for unlocking and upgrading your units and faction abilities. Players take turns activating up to 2 units at a time, moving, attacking, and using their abilities, and each unit is also going to have a specific range associated with it, and if an enemy is within that range, then you can attack them. Units do come in different types. They can either be air units or ground units, and certain units might be able to only attack one or the other, or possibly even be able to attack both. If you also have the high ground, that can grant you an advantage, but if you're attacking a base, it's only going to take 1 damage per attack regardless of the strength, and the way that you track health in this game is by the number of health chips underneath that unit. At the end of the round, all the units are going to refresh, and then any newly constructed buildings will become active. And there's a few different types of buildings you can have. They can either produce units, produce resources, or grant special abilities. But there's also certain points out on the board that players are trying to control in order to gain victory points. And you're going to be checking each of those to see which player has control, if any, and then you're going to be granting those players those points. The first player to either get 10 of them or to destroy their opponent's base is going to be the winner of the game. And if you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below. Also on the 22nd, we have a brand new expansion for the game Maglev Metro, and this is going to be the Maglev Maps Volume 2. This is going to be introducing 6 new maps into the game, with some of them featuring real-world locations such as Barcelona, but then some of these maps are going to be going out into the fringe a little bit more, featuring things like nanobots and ghost trains. This is also a campaign that I did cover back when it originally launched, so if you do want to learn more about how the game actually plays, I'll go ahead and roll that previous footage for you, and of course you can find links to the campaign in the description down below. And the way that this game plays is that this is a type of train game, but it's not your traditional train game where you're buying stocks and moving resources around the board. Instead, this one is more of a pick up and deliver as you're building a metro system, and this one actually takes place in the future. So your passengers aren't only humans, but they're also robots trying to get to their various destinations. And the way that this game plays is pretty simple. Players are going to be alternating turns, taking just 2 actions on their turns, and these actions can be things like placing tracks, building stations, or delivering passengers to different locations out on the board. And the really neat thing here about delivering the different passengers is that each delivered passenger actually goes onto your own player board, and there's going to be a few different areas on your board for different actions and abilities and scoring opportunities, and whenever you're putting these passengers onto your board, you'll be upgrading each of those. And these can also modify some different aspects of your trains, like their overall capacity, how many people they can pick up at a single time or drop off, or also enable the train to go in reverse direction. But your overall goals might change later in the game, so there is also a space on the board that allows you to rearrange the different passengers in order to alter your overall upgrades, and that's something you'll want to time appropriately to get the most out of your actions with your changing needs. And another really neat aspect of this game is that when you're placing your tracks out on the board, you can actually put tracks across other tracks. And the way you do that is simply by putting the tile on top of another tile that's already played. But the reason this works so well is because this game actually uses clear acrylic tiles with the tracks printed on them. So you can actually see the tracks underneath the other tracks, and it really creates a nice aesthetic for all the players. And players will be scoring points from a few different sources at the end of the game. First, they're going to be getting points for the passengers that they're able to get on their own personal player board, but then players will also get points for the different track tiles that they're able to put out on the board. And then players will also be able to fulfill different objective cards, and if you're able to fulfill those, then you'll also get points from those. And finally, if you upgraded certain scoring objective abilities on your own personal player board, then you'll also get bonus victory points for fulfilling any of those. Also launching on the 22nd, we have a brand new expansion for the game Earth, and this one is called Earth: The Animal Kingdom. And this one's going to be introducing a bunch of new content that you can just mix into the game. game, but the main feature here is that it's going to be introducing a bunch of new animal cards. Each one of these will also come with an associated animal meeple that will have different placement and scoring opportunities that you'll be trying to place out into your ecosystem. All the animals are unique and they're going to have different requirements that they want in order to maximize the victory points that you can score for them. But of course, there's already a whole bunch of ways to score victory points in this game, so you're going to be trying to synergize what those animals want along with everything else that you are building in your tableau. Earth is also a game that I did cover in the past, and I did also cover its most recent expansion, so if you are interested to know what Earth is all about and what they previously offered, I will go ahead and roll that previous footage for you, and it is important to note that this campaign will be giving you the opportunity to get all that previous content. And there are a lot of reasons why I think this game is so good, and I'll just come out and say it, this one absolutely kills Wingspan for me. I would never buy Wingspan because I would just buy this game instead. It features a lot of the same mechanisms where you're building out your tableau, with each of those cards giving you different actions and abilities. But what I love about this game is that no matter whose turn it is, every player is involved, which means that there's very little downtime. And also, for a game about plants, this one has quite a lot more meat on it. Compared to Wingspan, I feel like this one's giving me a lot more meaningful decisions, and this one also does have a couple extra layers on it with the different ways that you can use your cards. That does give you more options on your turn. Just placing your cards into the tableau actually comes with quite a lot of nuance, whereas in a game like Wingspan, you kind of just have to put your bird in a certain row. But in this one, where you put the card into your tableau matters a lot because it can affect all the cards around it. The cards are going to be granting you victory points by growing out the vegetation indicated by these cubes, and also by growing trees vertically indicated by these trees. But then cards can also grant you victory points based on specific objectives for those cards. This makes me really happy because I'm never in that position that I often find myself in Wingspan, where I just continually lay eggs to get victory points at the end of the game, not really making any decisions at all. And I don't mean to knock on Wingspan, it is an excellent game and it is a game that I'm happy to play anytime, and I always do have fun playing it. But when it comes to Wingspan or this game, it's a pretty easy answer for me because Wingspan I think is just okay, whereas this game I think is a really great design and has really fun decisions throughout the entirety of the game. And like I said, it's just as easy to get to the table. But before I explain how the expansion works, first I'll let you know how this one plays, because this one is a resource management tableau builder where players are going to be building out their own ecosystems with different flora, fauna, and fungi. And I've only ever played this one competitively, but I believe it does have cooperative and solo modes as well. But at the start of the game, each player is going to be dealt a double-sided climate, island, and ecosystem card, and then they're going to be choosing one side to keep face up over the entirety of the game. This is going to dictate what sort of starting resources they get, as well as their abilities, and also the different scoring objectives that they're going to be trying to fulfill. Each turn, players are going to be alternating as the active player, and then they're going to be choosing one of the 4 actions to perform, with each of the actions being associated with a different color. One thing to note with this is that the active player is going to be getting the major benefit of that action, but then all the other players are going to be getting the secondary effect of that action. Not only this, but it also activates all the cards in your tableau that also match the color of that action. The different actions allow you to do all sorts of different things, like gaining new cards into your hand, putting them out into your tableau, or even discarding cards into your compost, which essentially acts as victory points for the end of the game. Players can also use actions to place out different tokens onto their cards, which indicate different growth of brush, flowers, and trees growing over time, and these can all grant you victory points at the end of the game, depending on what other cards you have in your ecosystem and the different synergies that you might have between them. The end of the game is triggered as soon as a player has a 4x4 grid of 16 cards, and then the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. The new expansion is going to be adding a bunch of new ideas into the game, and like I said before, it will also be adding components for up to 6 players, but there's going to be a ton of new cards to mix into the game, including the new event cards, which is already a card offered in the game, but the current ones only affect the player that plays them, whereas these new event cards, you can actually play them to affect all the players, or even pick and choose which they affect. There's a new mechanism that allows you to store your sprouts for a second turn, which gives you a little bit more flexibility as you play the game, but the big change here is definitely the addition of the new seeds resource, which is a change that I'm a huge fan of because I think it's going to speed up the game, making this even easier to get to the table if you have limited time. But this is a multi-use resource that you can convert into almost any other thing in the game. You can convert it into sprouts, soil, growth, or even compost, and you can also use it for a new germination action, which essentially allows you to search through the deck for whichever card that you want so that you can find the exact cards you need for your synergies in your tableau and hopefully get you the most victory points at the end of the game. But if you are interested in this one, definitely check it out, and I will have it linked down below. And of course, you can click to get notified. And also on the 22nd, we have a brand new edition of Trickerion, which is the anniversary edition. And this will also be introducing a brand new expansion called the Arcane Arts. I do want to mention that this campaign does also offer an upgrade pack, so you don't have to buy the whole game over again. You can just get that pack. And then I'll give you the necessary components and storage containers so that you can include the new expansion in your existing box. But for those of you that are not familiar with this game is a game where players are going to be competing as magicians from the 1800s. Each player is going to be playing as their own unique magician with their own special abilities and skills, and you're going to be putting together a team, performing different tricks, and trying to earn the most fame. The game plays over 7 rounds for players to attempt to do this by earning that fame, but also if you find yourself with excess funds, you can also try to buy your way to the top by paying for marketing. But the core of this game is worker placement, and you're going to have different types of workers that you'll be able to recruit in order to perform different actions, and depending on the workers that you choose, you might have different options available to you, and each of the workers might come with a different amount of base energy that you'll be able to spend for actions at whatever location you choose. And this is an example of some of the different workers that you might be able to recruit to your team, and you can see the number of action points they have at the bottom of the token. Each of the locations that you can assign them to can also have different amounts of energy that can get added to that worker's base energy, and also you can collect different types of tokens that you can spend in order to get even more action points. In addition to each player getting their starter workers at the beginning of the game, each player is also going to get a hand of location cards. These are going to feature the different locations that you can send those workers to, and each round, in order to send those workers out, you're going to be pairing them with one of those location cards, but you're going to be putting these out in front of you simultaneously, face down, so that no other player knows exactly where you're sending each of your workers. But of course, these will get revealed, and then players will be able to send their workers out to the different locations, and the different locations can do things like gain you money, which you can then spend at other locations to either purchase additional workers or purchase different tools and items that you can use and reuse to perform various tricks. And of course, there are action locations that you can visit in order to discover new tricks, and these are going to come in the form of cards, and these can have different costs, requirements, or rewards depending on the trick that you choose. And there's a separate action in order to learn the trick on the card if you do meet the requirements of that trick. Learning a trick doesn't just gain you the benefits of that trick, but it's also going to be gaining you trick tiles that you can then use actions for in order to place out into different performances that are going to be represented by other cards around the main board. Players are going to be trying to place these out in such a way that you're creating patterns where the different icons on the tiles match the icons on the tiles next to them. Of course, all of this amounts to the main and most important action that you can perform, and this can only be performed with your magician, and that's to actually claim a day in order to perform a show. Claiming an earlier day does reward you with less rewards, but you are getting those rewards sooner that you can invest into other actions. But you're going to be gaining the bonuses of that action, plus the bonuses of the different tricks that you're able to perform, and those different patterns that you were able to create on those different performance cards. And although only your magician is able to perform this action, you can still assign your other workers into supporting roles to operate behind the scenes to make your performance that much better. Like many games offered from Mindclash Games, this one is on the heavier side, so there is a lot more content to this game than I can just explain in this short video here. But this is also a game that's been out for a while, and a ton of people love this one, and there is a ton of content and reviews out for this game already if you do want to see some additional opinions. Like I said, this will also be including a brand new expansion that you'll be able to mix into the game, and what's really cool about this expansion is that it's actually going to be introducing real magic into the mix. This is going to be making its way into the game in various ways through a mysterious wanderer that's going to be moving through the different locations out on the board, introducing new arcane actions and granting different arcane resources such as shards that players can use to increase their action points even more, or enchantments that can actually be used to supplement any of the standard components needed for your various trick cards. But these are permanently going to be upgrading those tricks to produce even more bonuses than they already do. There's also going to be some brand new supernatural workers introduced into this game, including a specter, a golem, a trickster, and a shapeshifter. As I mentioned, all of this will be offered in a big box solution with storage containers in order to make setup and teardown as easy as it can be. And if this one does sound interesting to you, this is a great opportunity to get your hands on it, and you can find a link to the campaign in the description below, and also follow along if you do want to get notified once this one launches. And also on the 22nd, we have Banana Boy vs. Uni-Cone, and this one's a competitive party card game where players are trying to have the most cards at the end of the game. The way this game works is similar to a lot of other memory games where you're trying to remember where certain cards are, and you're trying to get cards that match each other in various ways in order to add them into your supply. What makes this game different is that each of these cards are also double-sided, which has an important implication on the game, and I'll come back to that in a second here. But each of the sides of the card are going to have some sort of object on it, as well as being color-coded for the category of that object. The different categories are food, things, creatures, and machines, and in order to set up the game, you're just going to be randomly distributing these cards across the table. Players are then just going to be taking turns flipping cards in order to try and match cards together. If you flip two cards and they have the identical image on them, then you get to keep both of those cards, adding them into your supply. But if they only match by the category, which is indicated by the color of the background, then you'll just be able to choose one of those cards to add into your supply, putting the other one back on the table. And this is where that double-sided aspect of these cards really comes into play and creates an interesting aspect of this game, because any of the cards that you're not able to add into your supply remain on the table, but they're going to be remaining on their flipped side that you just flipped them to. This means that for each card out on the table, you're not just trying to remember what's on the back of that card, but you're also trying to remember what's on the front of it, depending on which side it's flipped to. This means that there's two possibilities for each card, and you're going to have to remember both of those and where they're located at any given time. And the game comes to an end once there's only 6 cards left on the table, and then players are going to be counting up their cards, and whoever has the most wins the game. And as a nice bonus, you can also fit together any 2 cards to create all sorts of silly images, but this is just for fun and it doesn't actually have any impact on the game. But if you're looking for a silly fun game that's easy to get to the table and play, it's definitely one to check out, and I will have it linked down below. And also on the 22nd, we have a brand new expansion for the game Aeon's End, and this one's called Beyond the Breach, and this is going to be introducing a bunch of new content that you can mix into the game, but it's also going to be introducing a brand new tier of nemesises, or nemesi, however that is pronounced. And this is going to be a brand new difficulty introduced into the game with new types of treasure cards that players can earn for surviving gauntlets of challenges. This is a game that has a ton of content out for it already, so if you are interested in this one, there is a lot to explore here, but also because there has been so many previous campaigns with this one, I have already covered it in the past, so if you don't already know how this game plays and you're interested to learn, I will just go ahead and roll my previous footage for you now. This is essentially a co-op where players are going to be choosing different characters, and then also choosing a final boss that they'll be fighting against throughout the entirety of the game. Each character is going to have their own associated deck along with the boss. Then players will be performing most of their actions by spending ether, which they get by discarding cards from their hand. This is a deck building game, so in most cases you will be able to get those cards back into your hand, but you'll be using that ether to buy new cards that you'll be able to add to your deck, charge up your special ability, which you'll then be able to use once it's fully charged, or to rotate something called breach cards, because players will be issuing attack cards to the various breaches in order to deal damage to the enemy, but it's a lot easier to deal damage if you completely open up that breach and all of the breaches do start closed. You'll be able to spend ether to actually rotate those breach cards to make opening them a little bit easier, but when they are open, your attack cards will do more damage to the enemy, but then you also have more control as to when they activate. If you ever run out of cards, you actually don't reshuffle your deck, you just take your discard pile and then flip it face down, which means that the order that you use your cards can be used as a mechanism to get certain cards that you want in a particular order when you're drawing from the deck again the next time. The order of the players in the enemy's turn is somewhat randomized, but on the enemy's turn, you're just going to be drawing a card from their deck and then resolving it according to its instructions. And also launching on the 22nd, we have Super Pixel Tactics, and this one's a 2-player card combat game where players are going to be fighting against each other using all sorts of different characters that might look familiar to you from different video games. This is a new version of a game that was released years ago, and there's been multiple expansions and new mechanisms introduced, but this new version is going to be consolidating all of that into a single package with a better storage solution, upgraded art and components, and a bunch of new heroes added to the game. And this one is also my own personal pick of the week because the more I looked into this one, the more I was interested in adding this one to my collection, and all the different reviews and opinions I saw on this one were overwhelmingly positive, so I think this is a game that has stood the test of time, has a really fun theme, and the gameplay to back it up, and I think this is a game that's really easy to teach and play, but it's also introducing some unique and interesting mechanisms that I think are going to give you a lot of depth of decision here. But this is a game where players are going to be starting with a deck of different hero cards, but you're always going to be drawing 5 at the beginning of the game, and then each of these cards are double-sided, meaning that you can flip them over to turn them into a leader, and every single card can be a leader. But from those first 5 cards that you draw, you're going to be choosing one of those as your leader, putting them in the center of your tableau. The leader normally does have some more impressive stats and also an ability that will affect your gameplay overall, and you are also trying to be the first to defeat your opponent's leader in order to win the game. The catch here is that you and your opponent are also going to have a ton of other hero cards that you're going to be using in a variety of ways, synergizing them with each other as well as your leader in order to try and defeat your opponent. You might have also noticed that each of these hero cards have 4 different actions that you could possibly use, and this is the thing that makes this game a lot different than almost any other game out there, because although multi-use cards is not a new thing, the thing that makes this one unique is the action that you get access to depends on how you play that card. As I briefly implied, each player is going to be building up their own tableau, and you're going to have these sheets to help you keep track of which cards you have where. But the cards that you place in the front row here, colored in red, are going to be unlocking that hero's red action, which is at the top of their card. If you assign them to the green row in the middle, then of course it's going to be unlocking that green action. And the same with the blue row in the back. If you assign them there, then you're going to be gaining access to their blue action. But there is also this purple action here as well, and that action comes into play if you choose to just play that card directly from your hand in order to perform that purple ability. This means that not only do you have a ton of different options and implications depending on if and where you want to play that card into your tableau, but you can also just choose not to ever play that card into your tableau and use it for its ability by just spending it directly from your hand. This creates a nearly endless amount of possibilities and permutations anytime that you play this game, which I'm sure will offer a ton of opportunities for being really clever with the way that you play these cards, and coming up with really fun and unique ways of chaining different cards together and taking advantage of the abilities that work best for you in that moment. But like I said, at the beginning of the game, you're going to be choosing one of your hero cards to lock in as your leader, and then the game just plays over a series of rounds, alternating starting player, with players just taking turns performing 2 actions on their turn. Every round you're going to have 3 turns, which means that you have 6 actions total, but the first 2 actions you take are going to be relative to the first row, and the second 2 actions you take are going to be relative to that second row, then your last 2 actions are going to be relative to that third row. The actions that you're able to take could be to add a card to the respective row or to attack with a card in that row, and if it's ranged, it can hit any location on your opponent's tableau. Otherwise, it's going to be only able to hit the frontmost characters. You can also use an action to rearrange the cards in your tableau, draw a new card into your hand, or play a card directly from your hand for its special ability. One other thing to note is that if any of your cards are defeated, they actually remain in your tableau, and you have to perform an action in order to remove that corpse from your tableau and make room for a new card. The game continues like this until one of the players is able to defeat their opponent's leader card, and the first player to do that wins the game. And if this one sounds interesting to you, you can go ahead and check it out, and I will have it linked down below. And of course, you can follow along to get notified once this one launches. Also on the 22nd, we have the next game coming from Restoration Games, who, if you're not familiar with, is a publisher that takes old classic games, upgrades them with new rules and upgraded components, and brings those childhood favorites up to the standards of modern board games. This game that they're launching is called Battle Monsters Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, and this is a reimplementation of the game Battle Masters, which actually looks quite a bit different because in this original game, you're actually controlling competing armies against another player, and you're setting setting up a giant map that you're fighting on and using a bunch of different units in order to try and defeat your opponent. But Battle Monsters looks a lot different, to say the least, because in this one you're going to be fighting as Godzilla or King Kong, and I did just notice that the campaign page has a slightly different name than the BGG page, so it looks like there's going to be a bunch of different creatures that you can fight as. If you looked closely, you might have also noticed that there's a bunch of these other tinier units in the bottom of the picture here. I assume those will also be controlled by the players, so it looks like there will also be some other units that you can control, which does bring this a little bit more close to that original game that this is based on. I couldn't find any definitive info on the gameplay of this new edition, but if we look back to that original game, it actually featured a main mechanism called the command card system. This is a system that uproots the traditional back and forth turn order that you see in a lot of different board and card games. Rather than players alternating turns, with this command card system, you're actually going to be drawing cards from a shared deck, and those cards are going to be dictating which units and ultimately which player gets to take their actions. So this could actually happen in any sequence of order. When your unit is called, you're going to be moving them and then attacking, and all attacks are resolved with custom battle dice. You're going to be rolling based on your unit's strength, and the results are going to determine your hits, blocks, and misses depending on what is shown on those dice. A very simple system, and the original game does feature a very simple rule set, but I'm sure this one will be making a few tweaks to that system. Like I said, Restoration Games always does a fantastic job upgrading these games in a variety of ways, and that also does include the rule set. And if you're a fan of what they've put out in the past, or if this one just looks interesting to you, feel free to check it out, and I will have it linked in the description down below. Also launching on the 22nd, we have Hubworld Aidalon, and this one is a competitive card game where the goal is to try and locate and secure 3 of your opponent's agents that are going to be hidden in a variety of places within either their deck, their hand, their discard pile, or even the board itself. In order to find these cards, you're going to be using actions in order to search all those respective areas, and depending on where you want to search for your opponent's agent, you're going to be interacting with one of the columns in their tableau. Of course, players are going to be putting different cards into these lanes, and they could create different obstacles or additional costs if you do want to try and search through one of those lanes. But if you're able to pay those costs and your opponent doesn't stop you in some sort of clever way, depending on the lane that you choose, you're going to be searching either their deck, hand, discard pile, or one of the cards in the tableau itself. But the amount of cards that you get to search through that deck is going to be equal to the amount of heat that you've accumulated in the game so far, which is going to be increasing every time your opponent tries to do the search action to you. The game starts by each player choosing a character card, which is going to be determining your starting resources, as well as your hand and action limits, and any special abilities that that character might have. Each player is also going to have tokens to indicate the number of actions that they still have left, and anytime you take a turn, you're going to be flipping one of those action tokens over, spending it to do different actions like drawing another card into your hand, gaining a resource, or placing cards face down into your grid, and you can reveal them later when it's opportune for you in order to enact whatever effect or abilities that card might have. But the last and main action you can do is to pay the cost in order to delve into those different areas of your opponent's deck, hand, discard pile, or board in order to try and locate those agent cards. As I mentioned, when you do this, you're going to be granting heat to your opponent, which makes that action more powerful for them. But depending on where you search, you're going to be drawing that many cards from that location, and if you do find an agent, you can pay the cost to secure that agent and take it into your possession, and if you're able to do that 3 times, then you win the game. But if the cards you find are not agents, you can just simply pay a cost in order to force your opponent to trash those cards if you don't want them to ever use them. But you can also just optionally choose to do nothing and send those cards back from where they came. The end of the round is triggered once all players have used their actions up, and then you're going to be refreshing your actions, gaining an additional card and resource, and then unexhausting any of your used cards in your tableau. The cards you have in your hand can also have different actions and effects that you can use to augment your actions at any point in the game. So if you're performing an action or your opponent's performing an action and you have a card that can interact with any of those actions in any way, you can always just choose to do that. But the game continues like this back and forth until one player is able to locate and secure 3 of their opponent's agents, and the first player to do that wins the game. And if you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked in the description down below. Also launching on April 22nd, we have a new campaign for the game NEXUS Arena Combat System, and this is a game that I think looks like a lot of fun where players are putting together other mutant teams of gladiators and fighting them against each other. And there's a bunch of expansions for this game already, and I think there's even a campaign mode. But I don't think this new campaign is offering any new content into the game, but it is offering everything previously released. And I have covered their previous campaigns in the past, so if you are interested to learn about this one, I will just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you. I don't think this is exactly a campaign in response to the tariffs. I think it's just a bit of a tongue-in-cheek approach that they're taking with this campaign because this game does have a sense of humor. But something that is really cool about this one is that they are offering free shipping within the US. So if you are in the USA, this is a great opportunity to jump in on this one. And I will have a link to the campaign in the description below. And like I said, I did cover this one before, so I will roll that footage for you now. And this is an expansion to the game NEXUS Arena Combat, which, if you're not familiar with it, is a competitive game where players are each going to be managing their own team of gladiators, except these aren't your usual gladiators because these are mutated monstrosities. And this game actually has a couple different aspects to it because there's going to be the main chunk of the game where you're actually fighting against your opponent, and you're going to be fighting with your mutants against your opponents, and because these are somewhat uncontrollable mutants, they may not always do what you want them to do, which is a fun aspect of this game. But because you're playing as the manager, there's actually more that you can do actually outside of the combat, because there's a few different things you can put into motion before the battle in order to rig certain aspects to your advantage or to put your opponent in a position where they have to make some poor decisions. But like I said, this new campaign is going to be introducing a new expansion to this game, and this expansion is going to be adding a few different modules into the game. There's going to be the hostile entities, which are going to be adding some different monsters that will enter into the arena and be threats to both you and your opponent. But then there's also going to be the mutation cards, which you can use to assign to your different mutants in order to move them through different mutated states and kind of change the way that they operate throughout the progression of the battle. Of course, there's going to be brand new different types of fighters that you can introduce into the game. There's just going to be a bunch more content added with this expansion that you can just mix right in. But then there's also going to be a bunch of new hazards and barriers and traps that are just going to be adding a little bit of variety into the actual arena where the players are going to be fighting. This is actually a game that I've covered a few times with the original launch, but then they also did release a campaign expansion that allows you to play through a legacy campaign, which looks like a ton of fun and offers a variety of different modes of play and also improves different aspects of the game as well. But instead of just going through all of that again, I'll just go ahead and roll my previous footage for you where I also rolled the previous footage to that. We're getting into the board game inception with this one, but if it does look interesting to you, I will have a link to the campaign in the description below. And of course, you can click that notify me button if you want to get notified once it launches. And this new expansion is going to be adding a brand new legacy campaign to that original game. But this new expansion is essentially all encompassed with a single rulebook, because within this rulebook, it's going to offer you all sorts of campaigns and storylines for players to explore. But then also there's portions of the book where you're going to be making different decisions or recording the results of different games that's going to change the way that the game plays moving forward. It doesn't look like you're destroying any components other than this rulebook by playing through this legacy campaign, so if you wanted to record your different results in a separate notebook and just keep this one pristine, that would allow you to reuse this in order to play multiple campaigns. Not only that, but it looks like this new rulebook is going to be including some new ideas and concepts that you'll be able to mix into the original game, and they did also take feedback from their player base, and it looks like they're going to be including some refreshed rules as part of this, with some rules clarifications and small tweaks just to make the gameplay a little bit better. And this was a game that I thought looked like a ton of fun when it originally launched, so it's nice to see them improving it even more. And if you do want to know how this one plays, I'll go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And each player is going to have some combination of skills across 3 different areas, which is their command, their influence, and their deception. And the command allows players to give their elite gladiators some special abilities, while their influence allows them to access bribes and other nefarious deeds in order to influence cards before the battle. And then your deception allows you to force your opponent into making some poor decisions. And this game also has a really interesting take on combat because it has story-driven combat where the events and cards that you play will create a bit of a story that will make each game unique from the one before. And the game offers a few different arenas to play on, with each one representing a poorly maintained space barge, each with their own hazards that you can take advantage of or avoid, as well as some loot crates to gain some extra weapons. In each round, players are going to be taking turns spending their command points in order to influence their gladiators to make certain actions, but the gladiators do have a mind of their own and they may not always listen. The team with the last gladiator standing is going to win the battle, but the player with the most fame at the end of the game wins the game. And launching on April 23rd, we have Valley of the Kings Ultimate Edition, and this new version of the game is going to be including everything in the previous releases of Valley of the Kings, plus a brand new archaeology expansion. If you're not already familiar with this game, this is a classic deck builder that features a whole bunch of different cards and decks that you can choose to include in any given game, creating a whole bunch of different permutations and different ways that you can play this game. But this is a deck builder, which means that the cards you start with are not the only cards that you'll get to use throughout the game, and you have this shared pyramid that's going to be in the center of the table, and players can only buy from the bottom of the pyramid, and anytime that you do that, the pyramid is going to collapse with a new card being put on the top. Players are going to be maintaining a hand of 5 cards, and there's 3 different things that you can do with those cards. You can either use them for their special ability, which can have a variety of effects, or you can use them sort of as currency for their value in order to purchase cards from this pyramid. Or finally, you can choose to bury those cards, making them inaccessible to you for the rest of the game. But the important thing about burying your cards is that it is only the buried cards that are worth victory points at the end of the game. This means that all the other cards you have at the end of the game that aren't buried will be completely worthless when it does come to scoring. And as I mentioned, this is a classic deck builder that's been around for years, so if you do want to find additional content on this, especially if you want to see what each of the different expansions add to the game, there's a ton of info on BGG and YouTube, and I will also have a link to the campaign in the description down below, where I'm sure they'll link to a lot of that and explain each of the expansions individually, as well as let you know what this new expansion will add. Feel free to check out all of that, and if you're watching this before the campaign launches, you can also follow along to get a notification. And launching on April 24th, we have Paw by Paw, and this one's a competitive roll and write where players are going to be walking their dog through a park. And the way this game works is that it plays over a series of rounds, where every round your dog's bladder is going to be increasing, and then players are going to be rolling 3 dice that are shared amongst the players. Players will be choosing 1 die for its movement points, which allows you to move in a straight line that distance. Then you're going to be choosing another die to perform your dog's sniff action, which allows you to fill in up to 4 spaces to the associated food matching that face of the die, with each space filled in increasing the potential value of that food item. Or alternatively, if you are currently located adjacent to one of the food carts, you can instead lock that food item in for the victory points that you have completed for it so far. If you don't do this for a food item, then that item is not going to be worth any victory points at the end of the game, but once you do it, you can't increase its victory points any further. The third die is going to be used for its interact action, and this is going to give you some different options depending on where you are out on the board. If you're at one of the bushes, you can choose to perform the mark your territory action, which will allow you to empty your bladder the amount of the die that was chosen, which will grant you that amount of victory points at the end of the game. But if you don't currently have the reserves that you need to perform that action, then you are not able to. If you're on a space with another dog, a cat, or a child, you can perform the greet action, which allows you to fill in spaces on your dog's happiness track. This is a heart-shaped grid in the bottom of the board that can earn you different bonuses if you're able to fill up different rows and columns. But if you're on a space that doesn't offer you anything in particular, then you can use this action to perform a trick, with each different type of trick being associated with one of the faces on the die. And that's going to allow you to fill in the spaces for the row for that specific trick, which is another way to gain victory points at the end of the game. One other thing to note when you are choosing your dice is that you can also spend water in order to increase or decrease the value of the die by 1 pip. This can only be done twice per turn, and you can only do it if you do have water available, but there is a way to refill your water back up to full, and that's by visiting one of the locations with one of these water faucets on them. Players can also play with different dog breeds, which also do add a little bit of variability depending on which dog that you want to play with. But the game continues like this until players have played through all the rounds on the round tracker, and then the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. And if you want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below. And if you follow along before this one launches, you'll actually get an additional map added to your pledge completely for free. And also on the 24th, we have a new edition of the game, This War of Mine, and this one's being offered by Awaken Realms. And this is a cooperative board game that's based on the video game with the same name, And this new version is going to be offering shorter game modes, upgraded components, a better storage solution, and a bunch of expansions, which are going to add new characters, companions, and people to protect. But if you're not familiar with this game, this is a survival story-driven game that takes place in a war-torn city. Players are going to be navigating a series of morally complex decisions, managing scarce resources, and trying to survive through the drab, depressing, mature-themed content. And I do want to emphasize that this content is for a mature audience. If you don't do well with uncomfortable decisions or situations, this might not be the game for you. But if you are okay with that style of content, this is supposed to be a really well-designed game, really well-written, and although it does take risks going into some more unconventional areas, I think that also helps in making this game deliver something unique and different. But in this game, players are going to be playing as different characters with different stats and abilities. And like I said, you're going to be trying to survive through a series of chapters, fighting hunger, illness, fatigue, and the physical wounds that are inevitable in the harsh environment that you are currently living in. All of these things can also kill you, but if they're not doing that, they're at the very least going to limit the actions that you have for that character, either by limiting what they can actually do, or by limiting the action points that they will be able to have access to. As you play through the chapters, there's also going to be different objectives or requirements and consequences if those requirements go unfulfilled. So this is going to be pivoting the player's goals depending on the decisions and successes and failures that they have along the way. At the start of a round, players are going to be drawing a fate card that can have a whole variety of different effects, and some of these effects might be conditional on the past decisions or conditions of the characters. And players are also going to be drawing a narrative card which can introduce some new discoveries and possibly grant some positive effects or items. But from that point forward, players are going to be taking turns spending action points in order to perform various actions, like searching for different goods or materials that you can then use actions to craft into items. And you can create things like radios, a workshop, a heater, or beds or other utilities like that, which can be used to just become more efficient or help you recover from different damages, or they might unlock new areas and actions altogether. At the end of the round, each player does also need to eat or drink, or of course that is going to have negative consequences on their condition. And then players are going to assign each of the characters 2 different night actions. The different actions that you can choose from is to send them out on scavenge missions, which allows them to draw cards, and this can help you find different items, people, or food. And these can all have different outcomes and may offer choices and narrative that you'll have to read out from the booklet. But rather than scavenging, you can also assign them to guard duty, which is important if you want to protect from the different threats of the world. And whoever you assign to that might have to deal with different severities of events like thugs, looters, starving civilians making their way into your house, military personnel, or possibly nothing at all. If you do end up finding yourself in a scuffle, you're going to be resolving combat by rolling dice depending on the weapons that you have. And of course, depending on how well you do, you might get some damage as well, which is going to be something that's going to be limiting you on the following rounds. If one of your characters isn't in the best shape, you'll probably just want to send them to sleep so they can rest up to either help them heal or deal with their fatigue. And if the players do well enough, I hope there's a happy ending here. I can't guarantee you that there is. Like I said, this game does have a lot of mature subject matter, and your characters are going to be pushed to their limits, and they're really just focused on surviving here, not trying to create the perfect life. And you're in a world where all the other people are also trying to do those things, which does push people to do things that they probably shouldn't be doing otherwise, and you and your fellow players are going to have to face those decisions as well. One of the things I really do love about board gaming is that you can be thrown into all sorts of situations with your friends, taking on these different roles in a safe environment. And this is a game that's offering one of those experiences, albeit a very bleak one. But if you're okay with that and you're interested to see what this one has to offer, I will have it linked down below. And of course, you can click to follow along to get notified when this one launches. And I almost forgot to mention that this one is also our Discord pick of the week, receiving the most votes from those wonderful morally questionable members on the Discord. And that's everything I got for you this week, but don't leave yet because we still have an awesome giveaway to announce, and this one is for a pledge for the game Fairytale, which is a cooperative game where players are going to be playing as different creatures, each with their own unique abilities and strengths and weaknesses. And this is a really cool aspect of the game because depending on how you equip your character, you're going to be putting these different puzzle pieces together in order to build up your character's board. But this is a game where players are going to be using their actions to explore and discover new areas on the map, collect different resources and use those to craft and upgrade different gear and items, interact with different points of interest and complete different goals to complete various quests, and of course progress the narrative campaign that's going to be offering a whole lot of different variety and story through the provided story dice, which can also present the player with different challenges and enemies that they're going to have to go up against. And combat in this game is resolved through a combination of dice rolling and action cards, where your dice will gain you access to different wooden components that you'll then be assigning in different sets to the various enemies in order to inflict damage. And I'm really happy to see this campaign doing so well, especially since the team was kind enough to donate a really awesome pledge for a giveaway here today, because this one is for an all-in pledge. And this is going to be getting you access to the core game as well as the 2 expansions, the Treehouse Dice Tower Miniature, which looks really cool here, as well as the Tales of the Evergreen Forest 40-page 5e compatible companion book, which allows you to play through this world in a classic role-playing game setting. This giveaway is also offered worldwide, so once again, I do want to thank the publisher for being so awesome here. And as always, all you got to do to enter this one is leave a comment down below saying anything that you want, but if you are looking for something in particular, maybe you could let us know what your favorite fairy tale or fairy tale environment or creature is. For myself, I actually had to think about this one, but when I was younger, I had this book of fairy tales and I almost remember nothing from that book except for a few stories, and the one that stands out to me for some reason is the Emperor's New Clothes. And if you've heard that story, it's about a vain emperor who is a fan of fine clothing, and he hires someone to make him clothes, but when they hand it to him, they say that you can only see the clothes if you are of a certain intelligence, and the emperor doesn't want to look dumb, so he pretends to see the clothes, but there isn't any clothes at all, so he just ends up walking out naked in front of everyone. I guess when I was a kid, I thought that was a pretty funny story, but there are some solid lessons there as well. Good luck in the giveaway, but now let's go ahead and draw the winners for last week's giveaways, and we had a pledge for Neon Hope as well as Mine 77. And to draw a winner, we're going to be using this fancy application here, and all these extra names down here are bonus entries for my members over on Ko-fi, and I really do appreciate all the help and support there, allowing me to remain independent because I don't take any payments or games from publishers in order to offer this content. And this is a lot of work, so I really do appreciate the help and support here. And on a more sentimental level, I do feel appreciated. But I already drew the comments here, so let's go ahead and draw a winner. We're going to draw for Neon Hope first, so let's go ahead and do that. And the winner of Neon Hope is Michael Blank, who is from Ko-fi, so I will reach out to you and let you know that you won yourself a sweet pledge here. And let's just go ahead and draw the next winner for Mine 77. And the winner for that pledge is Nicolás, who is also from Ko-fi. Thanks much for the support from both of you. I'm happy to help get another game on each of your shelves. And I do want to say thanks for everyone else who did enter the giveaway, even if your name didn't happen to get drawn this time. There's lots more to come, and we got an especially awesome giveaway this week, so I'm hoping to see a lot more entries from the YouTube comment section next week. But that is everything I got for you for now. So until then, thanks so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. I hope you all have yourself a fantastic long weekend and Easter if you do celebrate it. Try not to eat too much chocolate, but sneaking a few in definitely is okay. Until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.